I'm glad there's interest in the tsunami chapter of ASCE 7. So yeah, I'm going to give you an overview of what is in ASCE 716 and then focus on some of the updates that have been made for ASCE 722. So we'll start with a background, what tsunamis are, look at some lessons we've learned from the Tohoku tsunami, look at ASCE 716, and then the updates for ASCE 722. So tsunami background, as you might be aware, most of our major tsunamis come from subduction zone earthquakes, illustrated by these graphics. And that large earthquake results in deformation of the continental shelf, which springs back to its original position, inducing a bump or a hump in the ocean, which cannot be sustained, obviously. And so a gravity wave forms traveling in both directions, both onshore locally and also transoceanic. Those aren't the only sources of tsunami, but they're the ones we worry about the most because they're likely to produce the largest tsunamis. The two most recent tsunamis affecting the Pacific Basin have been the 2010 Maui earthquake in Chile and the Tohoku tsunami, or the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami of March 11th, 2011. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Tohoku tsunami, some of the lessons we've learned. But the areas we're worried about, let me get my pointer. The areas that we're worried about in the U.S. are obviously the Cascadia subduction zone along the northwest of the U.S., the Aleutian Trench, which affects both Alaska, obviously, Hawaii, where I'm sitting, but also the west coast of the U.S., and the Kuril, Kamchatka, and Japan trenches. So this area is also focused towards Hawaii and the west coast of the U.S. So the relevance of the Tohoku tsunami is that the failure zone on the Tohoku tsunami, that's the epicenter right there, but the failure zone is along the entire length of the northeast coast of Honshu Island, this section of Honshu Island. And at the same scale, we're looking at Oregon, Washington, Northern California. And the Cascadia subduction zone is actually longer than what failed, but it's not expected to fail as a complete unit. But a large failure on the Cascadia subduction zone will give us exactly what we saw in Tohoku. We're actually lucky that it wasn't us who experienced that event, and they are learning lessons from us. Fortunately, we have the chance to learn the lessons that they suffered in Tohoku. So let's look at some of that. This was the oceanic wave heights from that event. Obviously, it caused enormous damage in Japan, caused about $40 million of damage in Hawaii, one death in California, and damage as far away as Chile. It was a tremendous earthquake and tsunami. And the run-up heights along that coastline are shown in this graphic, as much as 40 meters. This is in meters, but in many places well above 20 meters, 60, 70 feet. That's a 5-6-story building. So we did see 5-story buildings that were overtopped when we went to survey. So because of this event, ASCE funded a group from the newly formed, we'd actually formed the ASCE 7 subcommittee on tsunami design and effects, or tsunami loads and effects. We'd formed that subcommittee in 2010, and ASCE finally agreed to fund the operation of that committee in February of 2011, 1 month before the Tohoku tsunami. So when the tsunami hit, obviously, they were willing to support surveys, 2 teams surveying the entire coastline that was affected by that event. Japan has a long history of major earthquakes and tsunamis, and so have planned appropriately, and they have evacuation routes established. They have signs that show you to the ramps or the staircases that take you to high ground. On the left here, I'm showing the evacuation route that goes up to a new hospital. A hospital that was elevated. They basically cut into the side of the mountain to elevate the hospital above the anticipated flow depth. And as I'll show you in a video a little later, the water actually went higher than that and got into the first floor of the hospital, but everybody was evacuated higher and so survived. So had they been down in the valley, there would have been a lot more deaths involved. So they have planned for these events. I'm going to show you a video taken from one of those evacuation sites, which is high ground behind this town of Kamaishi. We're going to be looking towards the port, which has a 10-foot, 3-meter high retaining wall or storm surge wall around the port to prevent storm waves, but also smaller tsunamis from getting into the city. The big tsunami like this one went right over the top of that wall, as you'll see in the video. So this is the city. You see the wall there now covered with debris. Obviously, this was taken after the event. All of these buildings have been washed away.